Welcome to Belly Up to the Blackboard, a podcast focused on the reality of teaching and other musings from and about professionals, hosted by Chris Munn and Justin Russell.
Welcome, everybody. We actually got it. We do have a special guest today.
Special guest, yes.
Special. Interviewing with John Elkin. Welcome.
Hey, how are you guys doing?
Good. How are you?
Good. It's not like I haven't been talking for the last half an hour. So, hey, that's you guys.
We're
Long
learning.
time no
We're
see.
figuring.
Yeah,
figuring out.
exactly. Well, it's 30 minutes enough to catch up from, 5 or 6 years? Has it been that many since we?
It's been a while. Speaking of a long time, right? We've known you for, I was doing this the other, 26 years?
27. 27.
27
Oh,
years.
my
26,
Math is
26
hard.
years. 1997. So do the math.
That's right. 1990. Yeah.
Yeah.
26. We're right. Wait, no, we got to count that
No.
year. 27.
We got to count that, yeah.
Good thing you were our English teacher and not our math teacher.
Yes,
Yep,
good
yep.
thing. That was Mr. Post. Or
Mrs.
Mrs. Roberts. You have a good memory.
Oh, yeah.
Roberts, yes. Oh,
when
my
I started, she was still there. So
Yep.
she was a colleague. It was fun. She's hilarious when you're not a student.
Yes. We're all human. Remember that back in the day.
That is right. We all
Right.
know that now.
Well,
So,
there was a different universe, as you know, and yeah, because you would definitely know because you're a consultant too now. Is that what you do? You're kind of have a
Well, obviously, full time, I'm a superintendent.
right.
And then starting like a year and a half ago, but we didn't start taking off until earlier this year, back in like February. I started consulting business with a longtime friend of mine who just retired from the Des Moines Police Department as a captain of the Internal Affairs, the Office of
Yeah.
Professional Conduct. So basically, long story short, we provide professional learning on how to conduct thorough and effective investigation for administrators.
Wow, yeah.
Because it's a new world on all the
Mhm.
stuff that administrators have to do, especially with all the complaints and the allegations of misconduct. So,
can you tell us what the biggest thing is you see with administrators? Like, what's the biggest issue?
Or a trend that you see coming out now?
well, the big thing is like we found a niche because I've had to build some unique things in my career once I became an administrator. And so you develop a skill set. There's no classes on this. Like no, and no grad coursework or specialist coursework. You take a class on that. It's like you become an administrator. It's like, oh, Chris Munn cheated on a test, so go investigate or do, whatever the grievance is. Chris
Yeah.
Munn would never do that. But my point is, I'm like,
Ever.
how do you learn how to do it? Like, you just go investigate. And it's one of those things where I was in some situations where some lawyers, state lawyer, insurance lawyers, our own district lawyer was like, hey, you're really good at this. You should probably teach other administrators how to document and yada, yada, yada. So I reached out to my good friend, Tony Knox, Captain Tony Knox, and I was like, hey, I think we have an opportunity because we could do a unique blend of law enforcement, best practices and strategies with my administrative background. So yeah, it's a whole new different world, that's for sure.
Yeah. Do you believe that because you're also, when you first started, you were social studies and language arts, correct?
Well, just strictly language arts. I do have a history minor, but I never really used it other than incorporate it into my English lesson plans and those type of things.
Like heroes, myths, and legends.
Heroes, Myths, and Legends, favorite class.
Yeah.
Oh, we went sideways real fast, didn't we? We just started this thing when
That's usually how this
we
goes.
like to bring up your past because it'll be funnier. No, I was just gonna ask do you believe that like your background in language arts really did help you with that idea of documenting, communicating, kind of that procedural process type stuff? Or is it truly just over the years of experience from teaching, you were able to, like you said, build that skill set?
it's a combination of both. I mean, there's things I did as a classroom instructor that I never did as a student. Like I was never a yearbook or newspaper advisor when I was in high school myself. And anymore, especially in the job of a superintendent, you have to be a chief of communication right now. And in the 2020s, you have to tell your narrative and you have to be very proactive. And if you look at the new Iowa standards for school leaders, the ISL standards, so much is built on like communication, those type of things. And it wasn't like, when I was a high schooler graduating in 1990, I didn't even know who my superintendent was. I kind of knew who it was. I went to, a large 4A school, but like his daughter was in my class. But otherwise, I didn't know who. I never saw the guy. And now there's different expectations for a 21st century leader than there were 30 years ago in communicating effectively. So you go back to my roots in the classroom on, newspaper class and those type of things. Those build a skill set on just beginning on how to effectively communicate, which you're getting better. Everything's about live evolution. I'm sure we're going to talk about that today. You guys aren't the same people you were 27 years ago. Neither am I. But yeah, this is just, it's all interconnected. I've done so much in my career that, like, I look back now, I'm like, it wasn't always fun, but it's everything's a new opportunity to build a skill set. Like, whether I was a drama sponsor, a tag coordinator for a couple of years, and now when I've interviewed for positions, they've asked like, well, what's the role of fine arts versus that athletics? And I'm like, well, let's talk about that. I was a football and track coach in the afternoon. In the morning, I would do plays and musicals. I did newspaper and yearbook, those type of things. I have two sons, and they live in both worlds. I have one who's into fine arts, one who's into sports. So there's a place for everybody. So it's your experiences, if everything that you've done in education that should build. You don't have a career until you look back. And these are experiences to help build your career. So so I know we kind of got off track there, but
no, that's good.
That's the most on track we usually are.
Oh, okay. First and foremost, superintendent, but then consulting business is 2020 is very interesting, as we all know.
Good.
Oh yeah, definitely. So that kind of touches on the first question we're going to ask. Like, so how has your teaching philosophy evolved over the years, and then what are some of the key principles that guide your approach in education?
Well, before we even answer that question, aren't we going to talk about like how we all know each other and how we got here?
Yeah, I didn't know how professional you wanted to be.
Oh,
so
he does presentations. He probably has an agenda already made up in the background, and he's already evaluating us.
How about you run this interview?
Hey, this is a special one to me because you guys have been asking me for a while to do something, and I was like, okay, it's all about timing. But like, going back to the beginning, you're my first year, but you guys are very special to me because I call my first 4-year boys. I still talk about you guys, and you guys are men now with families. You're not that much younger than me, but you're the first class of student athletes or activities that I say put through high school, freshman through senior year. So you guys are always going to be special to me.
So you were at a school before we met. How long were you at that school?
I started my career at Peyton Sheridan, Jefferson Scranton. I actually taught English, 7 through 12 English at Peyton Sheridan, coach at Jefferson Scranton, which is now Greene County.
County,
I think that's where Brian Phillips ended his career at. So I was there for 2 years. I started my first 2 years there, and then opportunity to come back to Des Moines area. And I was obviously at State High School for seven years, and that place is pretty dear to me because not only do I have some long-standing relationships with people like you, but obviously because my wife, the only wife I'm with now, her sister was in my class. I think she was a classmate of yours, and she introduced me to my current wife, my only wife, so Jamie. So obviously, I had a family because of that. So Citadel is special to me because I was there for 7 years, did a lot of different things, met my future wife there, and we have a family because of that. So Citadel was really good to me, and it was always fun. Of course not. Nothing's always a blast, but like I have nothing but good memories. I look back now.
Right. So how old? How old were you when you came to when we met?
Excuse me. I had to do the math on that to make sure. So 1997. I was born in 71, so 26. So I was 26 years old, which it was my 3rd year in teaching. So when I started coaching, weird,
like, as a student, like you don't think about how close you actually are in age-wise, right? To your teachers.
Yeah.
And one of our coaches for track, we're talking, and she's lower 30s, and it's Bree. She's been on our podcast before. But I was thinking, man, when she was in high school, I was already teaching. And you just like there's that disconnect sometimes. You don't realize that there's not that big of an age gap sometimes.
No.
Between who's teaching you and yourself in high school until like you get older, because we're not that much younger than you are.
Well, and then there's also the opposite too, right? Like you were a newbie coach, and I'm sure there were some teachers who were long in the tooth, right? And the comparisons or the things they were trying to tell you and teach you, and you're like, yeah, I'm trying to do this, I'm sure you experienced a lot of different things that way.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the biggest challenges for any educator is typically you're not very much, you're 4 to 5 years older than the students who start teaching. If you're secondary, obviously, if you're elementary, it's totally different. And that probably had a lot of impact on how I was early on because, you take your experiences from your practicum and student teaching experiences. And I had a really good cooperating teacher. I did my student teaching at Waukee, and I'm still good friends with her. And she was like, you have to make sure there's a clear separation, especially, I'm just going to say, when you're a male teacher, those type of things. And these kids are, not very much, because you guys were kids at that point in time. The students were not very much younger than you. And like some of the kids, like, like being a coach, I want to wrestle with you and stuff. You're like, you're like, I'm 4 to 5 years older than you. And in a way, it's like you have to do a clear separation. And sometimes I've seen over the years, I'm in my 20th year being an administrator, on not having a clear line on that. And that's a dichotomy of leadership. You want to be close to people, but not too close to people.
Right.
And if you blur that line, especially when you're a young teacher, it can sink you out. It can cause problems. And, my biggest mistake, I look back now, because I do value relationships and believe relationships form everything. But early on, I was more hardcore, because I was like, I'm not that much older than you. And sometimes I think students mistake that for you. Like, I'm not here to be your friend. I want to be friendly and have a great relationship. But like, I was more hardcore than I am now, because like I'm old and be their dads now. Sometimes they're grandparents. So it's like there's a clear separation now, because I'm 52 years old. But when you're 26 years old, I started my teaching career I was 24. It was like some of these kids were like 18, 19 years old. It's like,
correct.
They see you as them like you're just a punk. I'm 4 years older than you, so.
Well, and I think that's a good good advice, is that and you're saying like early in your career to late in your career now, but like even early in like that first year, you have to set those standards, and you have to make sure that, you got to be harder on the kids at the beginning, and then you can kind of loosen the reins once they understand there's that separation. If you come in trying to be their friend and, buddy, then you hit that second semester and all of a sudden you're trying to rein in this behavior that you really essentially created because you didn't put the standards, or you set those expectations early on in your career. And when you're talking about like how now you're older and somebody's father, now we have kids in that we went to school with their parents, and they're in the school now, and tell you what, that makes you feel old sometimes. So
well, and it's like you said, a dichotomy of some kind of boundaries too, because again, if their parents in the context of, we used to drive down Second Avenue lighting out bottle rockets out of a car. And there's their kid, and you're like, oh, well, that's a completely different relationship, because like you said, I have to come on strong now, make sure there's a boundary separation between the guy that used to come over and hang out with your dad, right, or mom, to this being your teacher and being the adult in this situation. So but I think segue to something I've been really wanting to ask, not just you, but an administrator in general, and someone with your experience. So if you had to put a teacher's career in like phases, because that's what a lot of people do, those first 5 years, if you were to kind of put that in a phase, what types of trends or things would you say as advice? So like the first 5 years, like you said, really important to set a boundary, right? And set that idea of, you are here as the person to build a relationship, but there's a fine line. But what would be the second phase or the third phase of a teacher's career, or what should they be doing as you think about that? Now that you're an administrator, and if you're a coach, coaching somebody through their career, what would the next 5, 10, 15 years kind of look like in segments?
That's a really good question, because if you would ask me what's the first stage, I would say that first 1 to 5 to 7 years is like setting the path of your career, like how you're going to be. And I'll just say right now, early on, I've always learned what to do by maybe getting your butt kicked first and falling down. Because my first year in teaching, there was a group of seniors. It was my very first year in teaching, and I was 4 years older for the most part, and I didn't set the boundary, and it caused problems. So I had to come back my second year and be like, no, this is the way it's going to be, because I want to be successful. And that's why when I went to Sadell, I was probably a much improved teacher, even though I still had a lot to learn than obviously my first year. So I think your first 5 years or so is like trying to find your niche, trying to like just establish your career, establish like what kind of teacher you want to be, those type of things, the educator. I think your next, we'll just say 6 to 10 years is really discovering that continuous improvement. I mean, because the pedagogy has changed a lot over the years, and I was never a big copy paste person anyway. Like, just this is what we used last year, always trying to get better. I really believe that next phase, I'm gonna say 5 to 10 or 6 to 15-ish years, is that continuous improvement. And that's a lot of times you discover, like, am I gonna stay in this role? Am I gonna obviously? I say advance. You have opportunities now, instructional coaches, administrators, those type of things, and a lot of it's not determined by you. It's determined by your experiences and people you run into. Because I never had any idea to become an administrator until Cindy Fish and even at that time, Richard Hutchison were like, hey, there's some things I see in you. Because it's usually other people see things in you to encourage you for some of those experiences. And then obviously, as you phase into I'm going to call it phase 3, which is going to say you're going to probably set your career boundaries for the rest of your career, what that looks like to do that. Yeah. So to me, it's always about continuous improvement and always trying to find ways to get better. Obviously, you guys have been in teaching now for, I'm going to say, not quite 20 years, probably about 15 years or so. About right? Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And as you know, it's changed a lot from year 1 to year now. And obviously, COVID did a lot for that, but just it's not like it was when you were in school. I think that's the biggest mistake we made, and that's going to be the biggest one I made, I know. And I'll talk about Chris Munn here in a little bit when I publicly apologize to him when it comes to grading practices. But the way we were taught is not the way that you teach current students. And it's just no different than like the way we were raised, the way I was raised by my dad would not fly now in today's in raising children, my own children.
Yeah. Well, and that's where it's as a teacher, like, and obviously we teach where we went to school, and we've talked about that before, but when I look in the halls, I'm like, and there's the behaviors, like this wouldn't have been okay when we were in school. Like I didn't want to step out of line, because if I walk down that English hallway, there's you, there's Pez, and then there's Crippen. And not that you guys would, physically do anything to it, but like you just did not want to step out of line because of that respect of those teachers.
Right.
And I think part of that too, and we can touch on this later about the retention of teachers, is that we had you guys, you were there for our whole experience in high school. So we knew the expectations, and it seems like now with turnover, kids are there longer than teachers. So those expectations either not there, or they feel like they're running it because they've been there longer. And it's hard to rein in some of those behaviors with kids with that turnover.
Yeah. And I would say stability, and I'm sure you've seen this, Coach, with being an administrator as well, as that turnover is. I mean, I remember being in middle school, even elementary, and we would hear that's not going to fly when you get to the high school, right? Or so-and-so is definitely in English not going to allow. And granted, like you said, it was your first year when we got to the high school, so we hadn't necessarily heard of you. But I do know as we got older, Chris and I, incoming freshmen, would be like, hey, how's, Mr. Elkin, or how does this teacher operate? And it was one of those deals where you really do learn the expectations way before you get there. So, yeah. And speaking of expectations, when you were interviewing for Sadell, like, what are some of the things you had heard about the district, or did you really have no knowledge of what the students were like, or the kind of the academics, or was it one of those deals where you're like, hey, I want to move back to Des Moines, I'm going to apply to 15 different, which is fine too. I just always interested how people land at Sadell.
That's when you asked me that, you got me, because I was, I grew up in the Quad Cities, about North Iowa, 4A school, 1,300 kids, 320 kids in my class, whatever. Yeah. Go to Drake, Des Moines area. So I'm in, Des Moines area for 5 years, whatever. Redshirt year, just so you know. And then I go to rural Iowa. I teach at I did 7 small school in Iowa at the time, and then Jefferson Scranton, I coached there and those type of things. So you got to understand, like, when you're me and you're in the middle of nowhere, Iowa, for the most part, and it was a great place. But like, it was only my age. No guys, no girls, no nothing. Like, I want to get back to Des Moines area. And this is, 27 years ago, where it was much harder to get a job. I mean, now you can name wherever you want to go. And we played you guys in football. So when I was coaching at Jefferson Scranton, we played. I actually remember my current brother-in-law, Dusty. I remember him because he's a big tight end. Yep. I remember Mark Bear, which I run into occasionally. And I just remember that an opportunity came open at Sadell because the yearbook rep I worked with, the company, was like, hey, there's a job open in Des Moines area at Sadell. I'm like, oh, I know that school. We played them in football. They're pretty good, because you guys should beat us. The 1996, I think we played we played Sadell when I was at Jefferson, and like Sadell came out and they were beating us like, I want to say 21-0 at halftime, and Mark Bear was running all over us.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And we ended up winning like 27-21 the second half because they quit running the ball and stuff. I remember, so to answer your question, I was like, oh, they're good football. That must be a good school. No deep dive on anything else. I'm not saying it would have changed anyway, because I believe you're where you're supposed to be. But now, like when I looked at different, I went from Sadell to Webster City, and then Webster City to Carlisle, and especially from Carlisle to Center Point as assistant superintendent. I do the deep dive. You look at everything. You look at property valuations. I didn't look at that when I was moving to Sadell. You look at you look at demographics, you look at scores, you look at everything.
Yeah.
It was back then, it was, oh, they're good at football. I think I want to go there. So, which if you think about it, I mean, look what it did. It allowed me to meet my future wife and have kids and all that. So I wouldn't know you guys without football,
Yeah.
Like that's, if you think about it, actually, it's actually a juvenile reason to just want to move to a place like, hey, it's in the Des Moines area and they're good at football. So.
Well, you were young. I mean, you were in, like you said, early 20s. Mm-hmm. You don't think about that kind of stuff.
Nope.
I remember, and we're going to actually talk with Crippen later today, when I was student teaching there, and there was an opening for like middle school history, I think it was, because the guy was retiring. I'm like, perfect. I'm student teaching here. I can get that job right away. So then I started looking at
right?
Yeah, Carlisle, yeah. And I'm like, there's property. So I went and looked at this property in Pleasantville. I'm like, that's not that far of a drive from Carlisle. I'm like, this is perfect. My life is gonna be laid out like this. And that's all I thought about. I was like, okay, there's a job opening. I'm already here student teaching. Yep. I'm gonna get the job because I did okay, I think. And then it ended up it worked out for the better, but like you don't think about every single thing. You're just like, here's a reason. Perfect. Let's go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, when you're young, though, you can make on the whim decisions like that. Now it's like, to me, calculated strategic. Like, look at property value. I mean, I'm a superintendent. Look at property valuations. Look at, the enrollment history. Are they increasing enrollment, declining enrollment? I mean, things that I didn't think about definitely 29 years ago. I was like, hey, Des Moines area, good at football. I'm going.
Well, like you said, you're in the third phase now, right? And so that makes complete sense. And, we have some listeners who are either thinking about going into teaching or who are brand new to the profession, and I think that's a good point, is there are some things that you have to make sure. It's just like buying a house, right? I mean, you're making a commitment. And so there are some things you have to have on that required list, and definitely have to do, like you said, a little bit of research, especially now, like you said, and we've all agreed that education's changed. I mean, from grading practices to how you're supposed to, build relationships with students, clear to communication at home and stuff like that. And I think those are definitely things to make sure you ask about in that interview.
Well, here's the reality. We all know it. Schools need educators more than educators need school. So at this point in time, I mean, we talk about retention. It used to be attract and retain. Now it's all about retention. We all know there's a shortage almost in every field. My brother, who's a federal judge down here in the South, is talking about like shortages in his office. Almost every industry has that. And to me, we're public educators, so we believe in public education. And, I do believe we are the backbone of this country. Public education is a great equalizer in my belief system. It's about retention and being attractive. And right now, it's almost like the NIL transfer portal in college. You can go anywhere you want, any point in time. We're all competing for the same teachers. The studies show that I think it's ages 22 through 35 want to be, if not in a big metro area, they want to be located by one. So even a suburb of one. That's why it's getting more and more difficult to attract a certain demographic age-wise to like rural communities. I remember my last year of being a principal at Webster City High School. I had a science position open, and we had 3 applicants, and 2 weren't even viable. And that was 2013-14 school year. So it's one of those things like, what are we doing? And you can only do so much within the school's framework on trying to retain people. So to me, it goes back to number one thing is culture. Culture is the deciding factor in my mind. I can go over here and make more money, but this culture over here where I'm working at is better. I'm going to stay here. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what I think it comes down to right now. I believe that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you see a lot of schools they're trying to put out bonuses for signing. I know it popped up one day was last year. It was Pocahontas.
Yeah.
They had one. It was a $15,000 signing bonus for special ed teachers, and it was like
3 years.
Yeah, it was like 4 the first year, 5 the second year, and then 6 the next year. I'm like, I can't believe. I mean, they're obviously, and they're in a rural area too, like you're saying. So, I mean, it's hard enough to find teachers in like the big, like Des Moines and Quad Cities, large population areas, but trying to find teachers for those small schools, you got to figure out what what you're going to do. And I think culture, if you retain teachers, you don't have to hire teachers. You know what I mean? I think that speaks to that culture part of it.
And like you were saying, Coach, and correct me if I'm wrong, but like earlier you were talking about, being a young guy, wanting to move back to Des Moines. Like, those rural places don't have anybody your age or those young people. I think is that a trend you're seeing? Is there's a lot more factors coming into play beyond just pay and a good school district? Do you think a lot of it's coming down to that yearning for network or yearning for relationships, connection? Do you see that more of a play right now when you're talking to people about what you have to offer for a school district? Or do you think it still comes down to good academic setting or, close to home, those types of things?
What you just said, in addition to what you said prior to that on the networking, I know the youth of today, they want more flexibility. I mean, everyone likes money. We know that. Nobody gets an education because they think they're going to retire with $5 million in the bank. But a lot of that has to do with flexibility, and it's definitely culture. When I talk about culture, I mean a healthy culture. A healthy culture isn't everything's rainbow slides and unicorn rides, or what I say, or lollipops. I mean, healthy culture also means like let's have conversations and then move forward, those type of things.
Yeah.
It's funny you talk about Crippen because when I went to Carlisle Middle School, I got to be reunited with Crippen for 7 years, and we had ups and downs, but it was overall a good experience. And we used to talk about our days at Sadell together, how everything changes. But definitely, when you're looking to attract and then retain current staff right now, you have to be flexible. You have to offer support for them. I mean, it was different when I was coming out of the classroom. I'm going to guess where you're at. Like, it was like, I had Cindy Fish as a mentor, but it wasn't like an official program. It was almost like, I remember my first year teaching, I remember go talk to the principal. He was like, you're a teacher, go teach what you want. He was almost like, get out of my way. And just go do your job. That's what you're here for. And now the right thing to do is to always like offer support.
Right.
The leader of a building, the principal, has to offer support. You're an instructional leader versus being a manager. And that was like the course of my career. I went to Webster City. I learned how to be a really good manager, but it wasn't until I was at Carlisle Middle School in the district that you learn more about instructional leadership, because that's more required. I mean, you're required to be an instructional leader. I don't believe that was really on the docket 30 years ago, required superintendents. So you have to be a lot of different things now. You talk about master communicators, those type of things. So because teachers can go anywhere they want now. I mean, if the pickings are for them, like I said, they can choose to go wherever they want.
Yeah, and that's one thing we're starting to do now is trying to, and I don't know if you've seen it in the news, and I can't remember if we talked about it before, but that we're looking at possibly doing a 4-day school week.
I saw that
as a way to retain and attract new teachers and good teachers. And have you guys brought that up at all? Like,
or alternate like systems like that
as a way to?
Yeah. We haven't gone through that yet. I mean, so this is my third year in my current district. I started my first year as assistant superintendent, had a lot of responsibilities and duties, and now I'm in my first year being a superintendent. So I'm not going to even touch that one right now, just because. I mean, I think my first, 3 or 4 years ago, was only like one school that did it. Cardinal of Eldon, I think, was doing it.
Yep.
And that's where Landon Miller was actually a principal at. If you remember Landon Miller, I think he's in Nebraska now. Yeah, and now more schools are actually going to that. I think there are 4 or 5 now in Iowa. And I was just at a superintendent conference. What's that?
No, go ahead.
Oh, I was just at a superintendent conference, and I can't remember where he was sitting from, but the superintendent sitting across from me, they're starting to have talks about in their district. So, because there's different advantages to it. The teacher shortage, it adds flexibility. There is some, depending on like how you analyze it, some cost saving benefits, those type of things. There's also drawbacks to it as well. I just believe it's going to be really difficult in Iowa because we're an agriculture based society. And like one thing I've really learned is like, especially when you're at the district level, every decision you make impacts the entire district. And before I had children, I didn't think about what daycare was like because I didn't have kids. I was like, somebody else watches them. Well, I don't have any family that lives in the area. So like daycare for my wife and I, when we were in Webster City, when we started having children was different because we didn't have any family there. So like, I mean, I haven't had to make a weather call yet. I had to make a decision for state volleyball when our girls team qualified for state this year. It's like when you can make fun of it, but even making a like, we're going to cancel school so we can, go to the state tournament, which was well received. But like, even doing like a snow day delay or even a cancellation, think about the hardship it puts on families who have to find daycare. So like going to a 4-day work week, it sounds great, but there's also a lot of what are the unintended consequences and how that can be well received.
Well, and and that's have been the big pushbacks was how are they going to do the daycare? And I know one of the things, excuse me, one of the things they're looking at is, so we do Eagle's Nest, which is a before and after school, and then like a daycare at Cornell. And we also do it for PD days. It's open for PD days. And I know they've talked about doing that at a reduced rate. And we actually use that this year for Claire because our daycare, she retired after last year. So Chase is old enough. He's at Woodside. So he walks over and, or he'll ride the bus to the high school. So we don't need him to, but they're on a different schedule. So she stays at Eagle's Nest. And I know that's one of the big things. And the other one is, the food, because we provide free and reduced lunch, and that's for all students right now. Mm-hmm. So even mine, who really we would not qualify for it. I'm assuming we wouldn't qualify for free and reduced. Mm-hmm. So I think that's one of the things is if we went to the 4-day week, we would not qualify for everybody. It would just be those who qualify, like the students that are low socioeconomic. Yeah. And I get that. Those are two big things. And for me, looking at it as a parent, Claire will be old enough they could stay home by themselves, next year. So that doesn't affect me. And then the free and reduced, the way I look at this, and I doubt there's a lot of parents that do, but I've had a kid for 7 years and then Claire for 5 years. They've had free food at school when we didn't qualify for it. So now if I'm going to have to pay my fair share, I'm okay with that because I didn't really need it before, but it was taken care of. So I'm like, now I've got to pay my share. I get that. I'm okay with it, but it's easier for me to say that now as opposed to some other people possibly. But I know was Waco was one of the other schools.
Waco is one of them.
I think so, yes.
Yeah, and one of the stats they brought up was they've done it for 10 years, I guess. They've only had 3 teachers in the junior high school that have they've had to fill, apparently. That was one of the things that when they were sending out our press clippings or whatever it is for our situation, they were trying to, one of the stats, I guess, or the data.
Yeah, I think 1 or 2 were resignations actually, and the others were whatever else. But I like you said, Coach, I think obviously there's pros and cons. Great point about agricultural state. And I would assume that's why the majority of our districts have not even discussed a 4-day. I know Bondurant, was it about 12 years ago, had talked about doing it mainly because of the expenses, right? Like you talked about some of the cost saving between busing, utilities, those things. But I think overall, the big thing that got them was because they were an agricultural area. And a lot of their, kids as parents were part of that. And then also childcare and just kind of a growing community. So
Martinsdale's brought it up too. I think they were just in the news. Martinsdale St. Mary's. St. Mary's. I think they were just recently in the news because it was linked to the story about our school, but they were talking about it too. They haven't made a decision yet either, but
one drawback, we talk about cost savings real quick, is there may be cost savings for the district, but the flip side is what about like support staff? Now they're going to be working less, 1 day less a week. And,
correct.
And for some support staff, the convenience at school and how it aligns with their own families is great, but now you do the math on that. That's a long-term ramification of you could lose support staff. As we all know, there's not like a plethora of people to replace them with. So you have to weigh the pros and cons carefully.
Yeah, and you just made me think about too is thinking about if some of the financial burden is shifted to parents for childcare. I just got to thinking what happens to school fundraisers and your athletic programs, right? I mean, people have less cash on hand now because once a week or twice, yeah, once a week they're paying for extra, and so I mean that's something too, I suppose, that needs to be in the mix.
Yeah, I think you have to look at all of that and then determine, pluses and minuses, pros and cons, and then like I think when we first rolled it out, I don't think there was a great job of communicating how are we going to take care of kids on that fifth day, and what are we going to do with the food that some kids come to school and that's the meal that's the only meal they get. But I think you have to answer those questions before you roll anything out. You have to figure out. I mean, look at it. What are they going to ask us? What are they going to push back on? How can we answer those questions? And like you said, support staff. And I know they're working on where can we put those hourly employees to where they can still work that fifth day, and whether that is, do they want to do the Eagle's Nest or, but yeah, that's for people that get paid like you, not us.
Yeah, that's funny.
No,
you asked me a question. You asked me about over the years what's my teaching philosophy and all that has evolved. I'm just gonna say it now. One big thing is grading practices. Okay, because we do things as we were done to us. And like when I went to Webster City in 2004 to be the assistant principal, where I was the assistant principal for 7 years at the high school, then I was the principal for 3 years. So I was there for 10 years. We really dive deep into grading practices, and it's right for teaching and learning, for actually learning. And I'm going to publicly apologize right now to Chris Mund, because I had a policy of your paper was late, you couldn't turn it in, and you look back retrospectively, that was the dumbest thing ever, because
you traumatized him his entire life.
Yes, I know, and I am owning it, because part of growing up is called live evolution. So you learn from mistakes, don't stay the same unless you don't want to grow. And one thing I learned that I really dived into, I remember even reaching out to you, Chris, saying, you know what, I just learned something recently. I wish I would have known it when I was a classroom teacher. Was like, I'm not saying there shouldn't be a penalty, but if you don't do your taxes, they don't say, I guess you don't got to do them, right? No, there's a penalty and stuff to do them. So like one thing is continual philosophy, to me, on my mind, is continuous evolution. There's no arrival. There's not like, oh, I'm a master teacher, I'm done, here's my perfect lesson plan.
Correct.
Everything's about continuous improvement. And one of my takeaways in every place I've been to, your takeaways was, if we truly care about education for students, is a great equalizer, which I believe it is. It's like having sound grading practices that are consistent, not done by classrooms. And one of those would be teaching for learning, and like having a paper turned in late was like, it's asinine and it's archaic. It makes no sense. So I publicly apologize to Chris Mund on my knees.
Well, here's me growing up. I probably was pissed at the time, but like, I think I should have turned it in on time. Like, as educators, as adults, we have deadlines. If you miss a deadline, it's like you said, it's not like nothing happens.
Right.
So I think, we'll say in a small way, that probably made sure that as I learned in the future, that deadlines are important. So I can't just turn it in whenever.
Yep. Well, and I think that's a great point, is the generalities, right? Like, we used to be all in that same camp of a deadline's a deadline, right? In real life, there's deadlines, whatever. And we would always pick out examples of how it proved we were correct. But you're correct. In general practice, there is a deadline, yet it's not like it's the end of the world. Just like you said, taxes are a great example. You miss your deadline, there's just a penalty.
Yep.
And you still have another 6 months or a year or whatever you work out with the IRS, right? And it comes back to that idea that live evolution, and you're right. Those grading practices need to be sound and consistent.
Yeah. In my own defense, though, Chris didn't do himself any favor. In front of the whole class, he was like, "Well, you like me." See, that put me on the spot, because they're like, "Oh, I like you, but I don't like you," so you have to be consistent. But
did I say that? I don't remember that.
Yeah, you said that. I remember. I have a good memory. You were like, "But you like me," in front of like 24 students. But the general practice as a rule was not a sound grading practice. But you know what? That was what was done to me. But I think part of, like we said, live evolution is like recognizing, but that doesn't make any sense. Or saying, well, your cover page wasn't right, you get a 0 on the whole paper. You think about the grading scale that's well over 100 years old. The 0 to 100 grading scale. The point for an A is 10 points. Let's say 90 to 100. But the scale for a failure is 59 and below. I mean, you have a bigger chance of being able to fail than achieve success. And if it's about the learning, if you think about traditional grading scale, it makes no sense.
Yeah.
And I've been ones that were equal, like, whether it's a 5-point scale, whatever you want to call it, it's the, think about it. I mean, but that's a whole nother conversation. So,
well, the biggest thing that made an impact to me on that same token was when somebody asked me, and I think it was in like a professional development, and somebody goes, okay, so here's a piece of work. Tell me what the difference between a 61% and a 63% is on this. And I think that was just life-changing to me, because I'm like, you're right. I can't tell you. Is it one word? Is it one question? Like, does that make the difference between an A and a B sometimes? Yeah, it absolutely does if you miss one question. And that changed my whole view or perspective on grading. And like you said, the grade equalizer, and that is a whole nother conversation, is that, having sound grading practices. Do you have a criterion? Do you have an idea of what good work or great work or above and beyond looks like, and how are you going to hold students to that continual learning on that?
Yeah, I mean, because give them that extra time. They can learn as they continue to go and make it a better paper. Now, I'll say, if I did say that in front of you, I deserve an F for that, because that's a pretty bad comment. But yeah,
we live and learn.
Like that. Well, exactly. So, like you said, you continually learn, you continually grow. So I think, they are outdated practices. So I expect you to go back and adjust my transcripts. I appreciate that.
I don't think it affected your grade, if I remember overall. But it's one of those, you look back retrospectively, and like that's not providing people second chances, those type of things. And like, there was a lot of merit to standards-based grading. I'm not going to pretend to know everything about it, but are you proficient? Are you master? Do you need more additional learning? Like you said, 61 and 63%, like, are you proficient? I mean, I think, I'm not sure where you guys are at State L, but it has to do with, like, if it's about the learning, it's like, I have 2 sons. They had chores. Well, I didn't do the garbage. Oh, don't worry about it then. I guess it's too late for you to do it. I'll do it. No, you're going to go back and do it. So it's about learning. And I mean, think about it. You were, I think, a junior that year. I think it was your junior year you took that class, maybe. So you're, let's say you're 16, 17 years old. I mean, the human brain isn't developed until they're 24, 25 anyway. Men, I think, are probably they need longer to do that for maturity-wise. Like, really? I held you to a standard when you're still developing, like, a deadline, and it's not even a deadline. Like, a deadline to me is like, it's life or death.
Right.
So you live and learn. So
you do. So other than that situation, what's another challenging situation you've had to face in your teaching career? And then, like, how did you overcome that?
Wow, what year? I mean, every year you learn something, right? Challenging situations. I do a lot of reflection. If you look back, like, why would I operate like that? A lot of it has to do with communication. Not that I would say I'm a master communicator now, but I really try to be proactive in communication. Obviously, I'm in a different role than I was. If I look back when I was younger in my career, I even reference my time at State L, like, communicating, because parents have a right to know the status of their student. And the argument a lot of times is, well, they're in high school, they should know by now. They're still dependent on the parent. And if you want to partner with parents, you communicate. So I think, just overall, general speaking, would be improve communication, to be very proactive, to reach out and be like, hey, Mr. Munn, Mrs. Russell, Justin's struggling here, whatever it is, to communicate. Because it's hard to do something about something if you don't know anything about it. So, I mean, to me, the big one is just communication. And we can preach it. I remember Gene Peterson, my principal at the time, was like, well, if a student's not doing well, or D or below or whatever it was, you have to communicate with the parents. Well, if there wasn't any follow-up on that, like, you didn't do it. So that was my growth there, communicating. I mean, when I became administrator, it was one of those type of things, like, I'm calling parents to let them know I talked to their child about, repeated behavior, to partner with them, so they can hear from me first, because a lot of times people tell their own narrative. So just a general, is just, people expect communication, and here's the deal, they want it like yesterday. And sometimes, like, I'm still working through the process to communicate, especially at my level. You want to be proactive, but you don't want to communicate something if you don't have all the facts. So, I mean, that's a general one I'm talking about, but I just look back at my time on, I definitely could have been a better communicator early on about student status, their academic status, and even type of behavioral concerns. Now, I do believe there's that balance there of, you should have an opportunity as a professional to like correct the behavior with the child, and then if for some reason it doesn't get rectified, then you reach out to the parent. Not the first time, little Johnny steps out of line, you call the parent and be like, well, let me be the professional. But if it's repeated, I'm starting to have trouble, I'm going to partner with the parent. And now I'm going to whey protein from.
Well, hold on. We gotta. Let's see. There we go.
We got a little sound effect.
Yeah, just a second. Don't.
There it is.
All right. So go ahead. Now, what are you drinking?
Drinking whey protein from GNC. Since I'm not in my own house, I had to go shopping as a post-recovery because I'm still a steak head, as I've been called my life. Yes.
Do you buy the big, like the barrel thing usually? Is that what you get? Like the one from
barrel? No, I actually drink something daily called IsoCare. It's just whey protein. I only eat one meal a day right now, so in the morning after I work out, I drink whey protein. I don't typically eat until like dinner time.
Now that IsoPure, is that because Morgan does that, but she does the one that's more like fruit flavored, so it's not like a shake. She dissolves it into just water, and it's more of like a drink mix,
like a flavored water.
Yeah, like a flavored water.
Yeah.
I
do that.
I buy IsoPure too.
Mine comes in a glass bottle. She has part of the mix. I get mine. I get Amazon as different flavors, but yeah, it's good stuff. I mean,
yeah, nice.
You get older, you can't outtrain a bad diet. You gotta have a bad diet.
Speaking of, I have C4.
Yeah, get on him, coach. Get him. Tell him how bad that is.
No, you know what? I still remember when we went up to, was it BV?
Yes.
And that your old coach, and we won't say names, was handing out Spark Pack. This is like pre, like before it got big.
The creatine.
Yeah, it probably had ephedrine in it or something. I don't remember.
He wound up in Sports Illustrated for that. He's still like a very close, I'm gonna say, confident friend of mine. I mean, he recruited me out of high school to go to Drake, and he actually doesn't live very far from me now. But I remember when that whole thing went down, there was a thing in Sports Illustrated about the college football coach and giving stuff out or whatever, that stuff. So I used to do Advocare a lot, but I haven't done it for a long time. I kind of ran out of it. I got sick of doing it. So
I do it. I'm still like a member or whatever you want to call it, because the discount, because Morgan drinks that. She'll do the Spark, or we'll do some of that stuff too still. But yeah, he's big into that. He's up at one of those upper levels.
Yeah.
I think of that.
Cheers. Yeah.
But
funny.
Yeah. All right. So, so
we were talking about conflict, right?
You're drinking tomato juice.
Yeah.
Right?
Tomato juice right now out of this, what do they call these cups again?
It's a silly pint.
Oh, silly pint. That's right. Yeah.
It's from my mom's restaurant. Do you know that? My mom has a restaurant.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. That's in Kearney. It's just up the road from the high school. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I did not know that. Which restaurant?
It's called Chorizo Grill. What's that?
Oh. No, I didn't know that.
It's like a breakfast and lunch. It's like a mom and pop diner type deal.
Yeah. Oh. Yep. Yeah.
It's a nice place.
Yeah. The funny thing is, like, so Jamie's stepfather, which is like her father, passed away back in 2015, and then her mom still lived on the homestead right there. That was in the district, but she moved like probably 4 or 5 years ago. But like 3 or 4 years ago, I went to the local band had a concert in the district at what was the name of the place? It's a corner pub area.
Is it McCann's?
Right there on McCann's. Tab or whatever. Yep. And like, I'm standing there and I see this guy standing there with Brian Simonson. I go up to my I was like, you got a problem with me? He looks at me and he's like, oh, but I didn't see Brian in like 20 years. It's been a long time. So always good memories. You run into people and stuff. So I didn't realize your mom, they had a restaurant. So
yeah, she's had it for
several years.
Yeah, probably 6 or 7 years.
Yeah, maybe. I think she just got her 5-year not too long ago. Yeah,
I don't remember. Yeah, I try to avoid that corner bar there in the district, just because you're probably going to run into a parent or two. So
right,
it's a reunion.
Yeah, it is a reunion.
Yeah, a lot of people. Yeah.
Well, I was there for the concert a year before because of this band that people I've known since I was probably 8, 9 years old. They played in a local band, and I was there one year, and it was Steve Newsom's class, so 2002 or 3. Yep. and they were having a
Yeah,
reunion there. So I took a picture with a bunch of them, saw a bunch of them there. I mean, a lot of good people I know obviously from Stadell. So
yeah. How many years were you there? Was it
7? I was there
7?
97 through 2004. So
Okay.
Was there a lot of turnover at that point when you left? Like, I know there were several teachers who had kind of left over the last couple of years while you were there.
not a lot.
There wasn't a lot
I mean,
of
there
new.
wasn't
Okay.
a ton. I mean, like I think Cindy Fish had retired, Pizzetti had left. But I think overall the core was there because that's something you brought up earlier about retention and like even more like when you have a constant turnover. And I don't like comparing but it's organizationally, whether it's a sports team or organization, when you have a turnover in leadership or even classroom teachers, it takes a while. I mean, the research shows sometimes it takes 2 years to get back to where you're at. That's why they say fire the coach, hire somebody else. You're probably not going to come in and win a state championship the next year with a new coach. It's going to take time to build the program. That's typically anywhere from 2 to 5 years. So
good point. With that then, so what's kind of a trend you see? We talked about climate and culture and stuff. So what's kind of a trend you see for people leaving the district they're in? Not necessarily education itself, but just the building. And then what is it about your district or the district you've been in that you've seen draws people? Because obviously applications are pretty competitive right now, so there's got to be something that pulls people in. But what do you kind of see those trends being?
For pulling in or people leaving? Both?
Yeah, either or. Yeah, both. Yeah.
What I've seen, especially in my new role, my new district, is the last couple of years is fatigue. Fatigue. When you have younger people, they move. They maybe they'll have children, those type of things. To me, those are outside reasons why people are no longer teaching. But the people are leaving. Some has to do with fatigue. They're COVID, I think, got a number on everybody. I think we can say that safely, and especially on educators and the fatigue factor. Now, I'm in a really good district now where our retention rate's pretty solid for the most part, and we attract a lot of people based on our reputation and our location. Just like there's people don't want to be in Des Moines, but around Des Moines, surrounding area. Same thing for where we're located at is, we're outside Cedar Rapids. Very close, but not in Cedar Rapids. So you have people who want to, be by a big metro area, but not necessarily teach or work in one. I've been going to Iowa games last couple of years. My friend's a big Iowa fan. And I met a girl last year at Luther College who's a sophomore who's getting offered jobs already. And she's from the area, or she's from the area kind of where we're at, Northeast Iowa. And she was like, well, I kind of want to be around the Cedar Rapids area. I'm like, here's my information. When you get ready to graduate, the last year reach out to me. I didn't think she was going to. And she emailed me 2 days later on Sunday night saying, hey, here's my information. So we kind of kept in contact just because she wants to be around the area, but doesn't want to necessarily be in a big area. So I think what they're looking for right now is the best of both worlds. And some people want to be in a big district. I get that, because for whatever reason they're from there, those type of things. I think that's what people are looking for. They want to have all the pluses of a big metro area, but maybe not necessarily being one. So that's why I believe, where I'm at now, we're able to attract people because we have a really good reputation in the area. Plus, it's not in the smack dead center of a big metro area.
So how big is it? Like the high school? How many kids do you have in the high school?
There's, I want to say 470-ish. I mean, we have about 1,500 in our district. So yeah.
I think 2 or 3A. I can't remember.
It totters back and forth between, I always call it a 3A school. It's definitely smaller than I was at because at Carlisle Middle School, we had my last year, we were almost 600 students. And so that's, even now when I go and I visit the schools weekly and I go to assemblies and I'm involved a lot, it's because I still go to I'm still used to I had 3 grades and it was 590 my last year. And we started, it was 470. So it's you see, you go and see smaller. So it's, it's every place I've been is different. And that's okay.
Yeah. Well, that's the attraction of where you're at, and what kind of attracted me to come back to not only just going to the, teaching at the school I went to, but you're on the outskirts of Cedar Rapids, like you said, but it's probably still has a small town feel in the school because it's a smaller group of kids. as opposed to, like you said, Carlisle that's growing. So you still have all that stuff, but you still feel like you're in a small town.
It is. And our mission statement even talks about that. Our mission statement, there's, like I'm gonna call it 4 indicators of success. And the last one is, we're in a small town atmosphere supported by parents. So people like that. Some people like being in big areas. I get that. I grew up in a big metro area. It doesn't bother me being in a big school, but it's what do parents want for their own children? So like what you just said, and Justin, you talked there too. I mean, there's not, when you interview at a place like you have a lot of pride in and where you're from, to me, that's the ultimate question. Is like, why would you want to come here? Because you're able to say, well, let me talk about that. You're greatly influenced. You have a lot of pride for the place. So,
well, and I keep coming back, and Chris has heard me ask this before, but the big question I've had the last couple of years is from like an investment side point. So if we talk about return on investment, and we talk about the school district, what does a product of the district I teach at look like, right? So after 4 years with me, what is it that I personally want to be able to tell people, straight face, not lying, that student is able to do now? Not, I don't want to make a general statement, well, they're a productive citizen. Well, that can mean 1,000 different things, but specifically what skills, mindset, thought process, do they have grit? Those types, like, what am I actually after 4 years going to benefit that kid? Because like you said, there's 600 school districts in the state of Iowa, right? Like, so there's so many different choices. So the idea is, what am I selling? 325. There you go. So what am I selling parents on, right? When they come in. Right. And I think that's what you're talking about too, is that climate and culture is that a student not only feels safe when they come here for 4 years, but they're also going to leave with these valuable skills.
Right.
That does lead to it. Yeah. So.
Well, you're talking about, a lot of schools have developed what they call a portrait of a graduate. What does our graduates leave the skills with? That's what most people call the portrait of a graduate. So that's what you're talking about. Like, when you leave here, like, what skills do you have? And I think we all know we're looking either at college and or career ready.
Yeah.
You want to lead productive citizen. What does that look like? And college isn't for everybody. Like my own son, my youngest, wants to be a police officer. He's set on that. So that's a different type of career path than if he went the college route.
Yep. Well,
that's
where I'm glad. I was just going to say, that's where I'm glad that we switched from that college ready to college and career ready, because there was a point where we're trying to push every student into college. Well, that doesn't work for everybody. You have to have multiple paths, and I'm glad we've kind of changed that. Even just the verbiage of it doesn't mean not necessarily everybody needs to go to college, because you need, like you said, police officers. Even if you're going to a trade school, you're not looking at sending a kid straight into a four-year college. Maybe they're picking up a trade, and heck, they're making a ton of money. And you always need plumbers, you need welders, you need mechanics. I mean, you need all of that. And I'm glad we've kind of gotten rid of that college ready in education. College or career ready is better.
That's a good point you bring up, because I was guilty of college as an instructor early on. And the best question I've ever been asked, my interview at my current district by the then superintendent, he said, if you had gone to education, what would you have done? Because I've had a lot of time to think about that. And with my experiences over years of remodeling 4 houses and all that, like, that was easy. Like, I would have been an electrician. He's like, really? Like, at this point in time, I would have my own business. It's like wedding cake and funerals. It's a constant. I mean, it's constant, and not everything is college track. And if you read the news lately about the cost of college, and like, what does it really do for you in the long term? There's options for everybody, but definitely, like, I was guilty of that, and I apologize. Like everything is not college. It's college and or career ready for students. I want my own children leaving with a product, like you said, Justin.
Yeah, absolutely.
So. Did your headset cut out a little bit?
It did, but it's back.
Sorry, okay. It was my phone. It was somebody calling, and it connects to my computer. So, can you hear us still?
No, you never cut out for me.
All right. All right. No, it's just mine then. Maybe.
So with when new teachers come in, how involved are you in those hiring processes now? I mean, in your new role, do you sit in a lot of the interviews and hiring, or do you kind of just oversee it?
So when I was the assistant superintendent, one of my main duties was HR, and everything's almost HR if you think about it, human resources. So I actually had developed like an onboarding packet, and I had started to meet with every candidate, but that gets to be a lot, and I can always do my schedule with that. I mean, even if you meet for 15 to 20 minutes, but there was an onboarding process I was involved in as a superintendent. Now, obviously, that's a decentralized, and principal makes that decision. I don't mind meeting people, like whenever I'm possible, like let me meet them if I can, just because I think that personal touch, and definitely the way I am as a superintendent, I know I'm in buildings weekly. I can say every teacher by their name, get to know them, those conversations. So it's the new way of doing it, I believe. I'm not going to sit in the interview, but I definitely am going to be involved in the process, because I'm the one who actually takes it to the board to be recommended for hire. So you want to have a background who you're hiring and why, that's for sure. So I'm not,
and your name's on it.
Yeah. I'm not micromanaging, but I'm not hands off. You're somewhere in the middle on being aware.
Yeah. And the reason I asked that is just knowing that part of being a leadership, right, and that role is, and you talked about the climate and culture, is knowing that you want to have a pulse on who you're hiring, right, and that part of it. Have you evolved into adding into that onboarding process parts about conflict, like giving advice to those teachers that are coming in, whether they're new or old or in the profession, of how to handle like parents in your district, or like what is the process for conflict beyond just going, filing a complaint and having a meeting with you? Like, is there some things that you try to provide them as far as tips or a way to guide through that and navigate through that process of conflict?
Yeah, we've actually done a lot of work in my current district on, because it goes back to communication. So like part of I'm going to call it when I had pre-service this year, I started with a poll everywhere, and I asked the question to all staff, and it was projected on the big screen behind us on what are the main things we have to do now, so at the end of the year we're not frustrated and we're trying to do an autopsy, which doesn't help you more than a checkup. And the word that came up most on the Wordle, the center of it, was communication. So, I mean, the takeaway for the entire staff was, it wasn't coming from me. It was like, what do we have to do to avoid conflict or to avoid being burned out at the end of the year? It was communicate. So yes, we do a lot with our staff on, this is the reasons why we want to communicate, what you should communicate about. Every school district probably has a board policy on, like, I hate to call it the chain of command, so the chain of leadership, chain of communication. You typically start at the source closest to the nature of the issue, and you work your way up. Like, I've had people call me before, the administrator, like, why is Chris getting a bad grade in math class? And unless I'm the teacher, I'm like, have you talked to the teacher? I mean, you're being respectful about it, because I wouldn't know. And a lot of times it hasn't happened, for whatever reason, because parents don't want to talk to the teacher as well. They feel intimidated. Like, that's where you would start. So I think to avoid those conflicts, it starts with being proactive in communication. Does that mean you're going to avoid every conflict, or people are not going to have grievances? No, of course it's going to happen. But to me, if you are able to communicate, be proactive when they do happen, or someone does have a question, they knew how to go to. It's kind of like I did some learning when I was going through my program to be a superintendent on go to your waiter. Like, if you go out to dinner with your wife and your soup's cold, and I complained to Jamie, God, my soup's cold. I mean, she's like, why are you telling me? Talk to the officer.
What am I going to do?
And it's kind of like the mindset of go to your waiter. It's not complaining if you go right to the person who can solve your problem, right? If you come to me and say, I want to talk about that, it's not complaining. Complaining is what you do in the parking lot when the person can't do anything about it.
Great point. Yeah. Great point.
So, hope I answer your question.
Yeah, you did, and I love that you're here because you have a different perspective. I mean, obviously, you've moved through those different levels of education, and you're to a part where now you can make some real beneficial decisions, right, and put some things into practice that have some real impact. And so, I greatly appreciate that, because we try to provide some suggestions or thoughts and things for not just new staff, but staff who are on the edge of being burnt out, right? And trying to not necessarily figure out their why, but come back to the idea of what they want to accomplish. And you're correct. I think it's that idea of portraits. Trying to remember that the portrait you have now after 15 years is going to be vastly different than when you first got in. And that's a great point. You made several, and I wrote down that question you did on the poll, because I think it's a great question of it. and it's never too late, right? Like, I mean, we have second semester coming up. I think for a lot of teachers, now is a great time to, if you wanted to change the climate culture in your classroom, now's a perfect time to do it. You have not necessarily a whole new group of kids, but you have some new kids.
Yeah, and this is kind of where you hit that reset button.
Yeah.
And I know, and I don't know about when you were in education or when you were in teaching. I know when I was younger, like, Christmas break, I'd go in 2 to 3 times before I had the kids, 2 to 3 times, work in my room, get caught up and stuff like that, or get ready for the second semester. And then you don't really have that separation of, like you said, to hit the reset and like reset your standards, but you also need that time away so it doesn't feel like the year continues to drag on. You need to have that time for yourself. And when you were a teacher, did you do that, or did you live in the classroom over breaks?
No, I didn't live in the classroom. And I believe really, and I say this, it's not using a key word that, especially in today's world, you need to disconnect. I mean, like for me, I take work email off my phone. I don't want it because I'm very, what's the word that if I see an email, I'll have to read it. So I took it off my phone because you have to have that disconnect. Now I get in my current role, and when you're a building principal, I mean, you're always on the clock in a way, but you have to disconnect. And so, but I'm going to go back to Bill Belichick or even Bill Walsh, the former 49ers coach, be the most well-prepared person in the room. And I don't know about you, I've never tried to wing a lesson plan because it doesn't work. So you got to spend some time. We know that. And it's been said that the bulk of education is built on the unpaid time of teachers. And that's why we go into it, because we're dedicated. We care about students. So you have to disconnect, but you still have to do some work. Like even I'm on vacation now, if you want to call that, with my family, I'll do some work on that. But it's really important that you do disconnect. Otherwise, you will become burnout. You want to be prepared, but not living in a classroom all the time, because it just doesn't work. It's not sustainable. And something you guys talked about was the reset. In every place I've been, I've always been able to reflect, and that's I've grown in this area. I've improved. Like what I really learned that when I was a principal at Carlisle Middle School was culture really matters. And there's a difference between doing a checkup and doing like an autopsy. An autopsy tells you why you died, right? You can't do anything about it.
Yep.
And my last several years, we implemented what we call checkup surveys, like every 7 weeks. And then by the 8th week, you formulate a plan. And it revolved around the core principles, which in my mind, as a leader of the building or the district, you focus on like healthy culture. You focus on system alignment, having all systems working together. And you focus on that collaborative piece, for student achievement. And so I've also brought that to my current district, where every 7 weeks now the buildings do it. They do a checkup survey. Started doing it this year for the most part. And they ask, basically it's one question per core area. What's going well that we need to keep doing? What's an area we need to improve upon or keep an eye on, those type of things. And then in that manner, because there's always different, somebody's coming in here, because there's different, ebbs and flows through the school year, what happens when. If you do those checkup surveys with staff, you get staff input and your leadership team comes together. Somebody's crawling in here.
That's fine.
It's like
I really believe if you do those, that you keep the pulse of the staff at the forefront, and it's a collective, collaborative way to keep things going. So at the end of the year, you're not frustrated. So I encourage anybody to do those type of. I encourage any school or class or district to do like I do do those checkup surveys, because that's what's going to be sustainable for staff.
It's a great
I
point.
believe in those wholeheartedly.
And I liked your point at the not just polling, but you make an action plan. And would you say that's where a lot of districts struggle? Is they're really good about collecting data or information, but just that idea of creating an action plan, something that is going to address those. Do you think that's where a lot of districts struggle? And then that leads to really, as a result, more burnout or kind of that climate and culture declining? Like, what do you think is the main result of districts struggling to put together that plan?
Confronting brutal truths. I mean, here's the thing with seeking feedback. You have to be willing to accept the feedback you get. So if you put out a checkup survey that says, what's an area in our system alignment that we want to keep an eye on, and it comes back on, what's going on here? It comes back on like, hey, cell phones or tardies or whatever management thing you want to be, it comes back as an issue. What are you going to do to fix it? And kind of, I had a street sign I got from one of my professors, and it said, "Fix it or live with it." So you can complain about it. That doesn't do any good. Either fix a problem or live with it. And that's where the beneficial thing, you asked the question, is that what people struggle with? Make it a concrete action plan. Or some people get the feedback, and is it that big of a problem? Well, if the consensus, you can't address everything, comes back like cell phones are an issue, or tardies, or whatever the issue is, or sub coverage, what's the plan to fix it? And that really became, I believe, a linchpin for when I was a middle school principal, on how we kept improving type of things. We just started implementing it here. And to me, if you have in our district, 4 buildings that are highly functional, then you have a highly functional district.
Yeah.
So on that, if you implement a plan, like we've done it with cell phones this year, we a pretty good plan, I would say. And everybody says we need to take care of cell phones. What do you do if you're the building principal? What do you do if you have that one teacher that's like, I'm not going to do it? They complain about the cell phone policy, but they're not going to be part of the solution. How do you handle that?
Confront brutal honesty in a professional manner. You have the conversation, whether it's a crucial or critical conversation on, because former middle school principal, that was an issue. And it is typically not the majority of the staff. It's the outliers who, when I say be consistent, you have to be consistent, right? Because if the 3 of us, we have a rule, but like Justin's the nice teacher, lets kids use their cell phones at inappropriate times, it makes it more difficult for the ones who are holding them to the standard. That's what accountability is. Right. As a leader of the building, and I do believe everything rises and falls with leadership, it's the leader of the building's responsibility to have that conversation with staff member and say, this is non-negotiable. The consensus of staff is we're going to, whatever, implement the cell phone practice. You have to have the conversation with the staff member, and then you offer them coaching and support, and follow-up is very important. It's about being professional. It's about having a good relationship with them. It's not about, here's the thing about me, guys, is when I was younger, I played minor league football for a long time in college and all that. When I was younger, I was more of, I'm going to be a bulldozer. I'm a middle linebacker. I'm going to come at you. When we get older, you start learning to take angles better. Like, I don't need to learn how to read a play. I'll just run there because I'm fast and strong. Well, you got to be strategic about it. You have to start taking angles, especially in my latter couple of years of my career. I had to be more strategic on, I don't think I'll just take that thing head on. You take a good angle, those type of things. And that's how you get further with people. You treat them with respect. And, the Simon Sinek, I know you guys know who he is, the why. Why are we doing this as a staff? So to me, Chris, to answer your question, the leader of the building has to be able to have the conversation with the staff member, because it's for the greater good. It's not, my rule. Hey, this is what we came up with.
Well, we had that before when we had a no hats, no hoods policy a few years ago, probably about 4 or 5 years ago. And you'd have the majority of the staff that would take care of it, deal with it, tell them, they'd have that fight with the kid if they had to. Yeah. And then you'd walk by a class and there'd be kids with hats and hoods on. So then you have those leaders in the building that would follow the policy and implement it. Then they're like, well, why am I doing this? Because all you hear in your classroom is, well, they let me do it. Right. And it just kind of crumbles from the inside. So that's, so I like that you don't say you send just a mass email, telling everybody. It's got to be one of those things that's taken care of with those individual teachers. Cause you have the teachers that are following it and like are hardcore on it, or not even that, but and then all of a sudden they're like, well, what's the point of even doing this? So then they start to like lax on it as well. And then it just becomes a moot point.
What's the saying? Ships don't sink because of the water around them. It sinks because of the water gets inside them. And I also believe that I learned a lot about what true leadership really was in my previous district, and owning it. Extreme ownership. Jocko Willink. Go Google him. Read the book.
And, I got the book.
Great guy.
Yeah, you have to be able to willing to stand as a building principal in this case. You have to be willing to stand in front of students, whether it's once or twice a year, and say, here's our 3 or 5 big rocks. One of them is hats and hoods. And here's the deal, you're always going to be asked respectfully to take it off. And if you don't comply, then you're going to talk to me. Not about being trying to be scary or whatever. It's just, here's the expectation, here's the standard, and then decentralized way. I mean, a building principal can't be in every classroom simultaneously. People have to enforce the standard, because if that's what the collective will. That's what consensus is. It's not a unanimous vote. It's consensus
consensus.
Here's our standards.
Yep. And that's the funny thing, you say consensus, because there's a lot of policies, not just in our handbook, but across the districts in the state, that are put there because teachers at one time as a consensus, said it was an issue, right? So we want a policy in the handbook. Well, you would think then if it's in the handbook and it was made by teachers, that should be what everybody follows. But whatever the reason is, and I get it, as a first year teacher, or even as a teacher after 15 years, there are times where I'm sitting in class, I'm like, gosh, do I want to have this battle again? Like, I've told that kid every day not to have their hood on, and I get it. Yet on the same token, we get an abundance of what we permit, right? And the moment you say, I'm going to let this go, you just lost all credibility, right? There's no way coming back from that. It's going to be 10 times harder. And so I think you're right. And I think communication is a lost art, don't you? Do you see that with a lot of newer teachers? Just because they're trying to survive, do you see them shutting down more, or communication is kind of slowing down? Or do you see, because it is such a hectic field right now, that there is a lot more communication, but it's in the form of maybe complaining or venting or, other forms?
No, that's a good question. I think it really comes down to that person's capacity at that point in time. We all have different experiences of going to school, where our student teaching was, those type of things. I mean, you talk about policy, which, as a superintendent, I say, I don't hide behind policy. I stand next to it and say, here's the standard. And you said something that makes me laugh, because every policy out there is because somebody did something they shouldn't have done, so they made a policy say, here's a framework for it, right? And they're not policy to make one. So I've been in the past for people like, oh, the policy, you're like, I don't hide behind policy. Here's a framework by which you operate. Iowa code, board policy, those type of things, because it's, most policy is written in general terms. It's not usually black or white, but there's a general term on the way it outlines for that. You guys are probably gonna think I'm getting soft, but I've also have almost 3 years of experience where no hats, no hoods. When I went to Webster City High School, it was always an issue with hats and hoods. And now you pull back now, and for some students, there's a legitimate reason. I know you probably think I'm getting soft. They might have a hood up because they want to be isolated. They want to maybe dampen out noise or outside stimuli, or I'll be honest, maybe some anxiety issues, those type of things. So it's one of those things, like, before you start tearing a fence down, maybe know why it's put up. I get there's safety reasons why you can't have hats and hoods and some type of things. But it's definitely not 1950 anymore.
No.
So I'm not a bleeding heart where I'm like, well, we'll just do whatever people want. I also kind of dig into the cause on, like, what's worth battling, what's not worth battling.
Yeah. Nope, you're right.
Well, that's always what I always kind of brought up, is like, okay, and we battled it, and it was such a pain because you'd have to fight kids. And like, why? Well, it's policy. I'm like, and if we're not going to enforce it, and we don't think it's worth enforcing, let's take it out of the policy, because then we don't have to worry about the fight with the kids in there. But now, like, I've kind of changed too. I'm like, if they wear as long as it's appropriate, who cares if they wear a hat? We wear jeans I can wear jeans every day now. I'm like, it doesn't change how I teach. It's just so man, we've had
it goes to like safety. Like, here's my deal. Like, you guys are a metro area where, is it, and I'm not trying to scare anybody, but is it feasible somebody from another school could come and walk in their school and nobody wouldn't know who they are? And I don't know if you have student IDs and stuff like that. To me, one way you can articulate it, the reason we don't wear hoods is we have to be able to identify students. In a school, your district size, everyone pretty much knows everybody. But somebody who walks in with a hood or a face covering on who they are, they could be from another school district. I get rural communities probably different. So if it's a safety issue, then it's not even hiding behind the policy. It's a safety issue, because we have to be able to identify everybody every day for safety reasons. Because if you want to say, well, nothing ever bad happened here, you sure about that? So you have to have a good why, in my mind.
Yes.
We've had you on here almost
an hour,
hour and a half.
Yeah.
Is that going to be a record? Record?
It is a new record. You might have to make this a two-part.
Which is fine.
Yeah.
Okay, so I said that.
I will. We'll set the bar for him. So hey, before we let you go and hang out with your family, and I got to see if my kids are burning down the house upstairs. As a veteran in education, what's a piece of advice that you would offer new educators just getting into the profession?
I would really recommend just making sure you communicate very well. because the learners of today, they say they're changing every like 3 years now. So think about it. You go to college to be an educator, and just the fundamental ways students have learned and what's relevant has changed by the time they get out of school. So the pedagogy and instructional practice. So, relationships, communicate, and always strive to be engaged in continuous improvement, to be a learner yourself, because that's the only way you're going to be successful. I mean, if I had remained the way I was 29 years ago when I first got education, then I would be very unsuccessful, because the world changes. If you don't change with it, that's where you're at. And education has changed a lot just in the last, I'm going to say, 4 years. I mean, 4 years ago, this type of meeting was really rare. It was Skype, and now can you imagine not operating now without Zoom or Google Meet? So so it's just those type of things. You have to be willing to, people are like, oh, I hate technology. Well, you better get used to it, because it's the way of the world. So,
yeah, it's not going away.
Yeah.
But yeah,
good piece of advice.
That's my quick advice right there.
Hey, next time we do this, we'll have to do it when you're around Des Moines. We'll have to do it in person. So
I can do that. Yeah, we can do that.
Yeah,
If you're gonna have me back, I would be honored to be on. You guys know I have nothing but the highest respect for you guys. I love you guys.
Stop it. We greatly appreciate this, Coach. This has been amazing. I've been looking forward to this for the last couple of weeks.
I know,
Yeah, it's been awesome.
And you guys have to really G-rated too. I like it.
See? Yeah.
Well, we didn't get too worked up because you're our guest. We were putting you in the hot seat.
Crippins is really going to go off the rails this afternoon.
I'm going to have to listen to that one. You go, hey, Crippins, I'll go, oh.
So
it could last 10 minutes. It could last an hour. I don't know.
We'll figure it out. Yeah, no, we're moving here, a couple months, I think. So we're going to have a permanent spot for where we're going to have this podcast. Right now we're in the basement, and there's crap everywhere, boxes and everything. So we're moving into my grandma and grandpa's house. So we're having a cool spot. Yeah. So looking forward to that. But
yes, let's keep in touch, man, because we'll definitely have you when you're in person.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, totally. And if I can remember, Justin, I'll send you the actual Wordle. You said you wrote down the Wordle, the question I asked the staff, because
if you wouldn't mind.
I can. Public education, man. You have to beg, borrow, steal, and share. I mean, that's why you're successful. So I have no problem sharing anything with you guys. So So
we appreciate having you on here. I'm glad we could talk to you.
I'm honestly honored you guys asked me to. I mean, this is fun. I can already talk all day with you guys about your questions. So if you want to do another one with me someday, well, we can certainly do that. So
absolutely,
man. So well, have a good New Year, Coach. Yeah, it was great talking to you.
Tell your families hello. So.
Safe travels back when you head out. So.
Well, all right. You guys take care. I'll talk to you soon.
All right. See ya.
Here, buddy.
Yeah.
All right. Trying to.